Johnny Depp, Narcissist or Empath, Part 20. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and we now enter the final straight with regard to our analysis about Johnny Depp. We have covered a huge amount of material, and it was important to do so. But we turn to the information and disclosures that have come from the recent defamation trial that has been taking place in Virginia. I'm not going to go through all of the evidence, but I am going to extract certain key aspects of it. Of course, I've touched on parts of it earlier in this series, but we do have to take into account various allegations and evidence that has come to light as part of understanding more about Depp. Depp presented rather well in court. He invariably appeared relaxed. He appeared to have a good relationship with his legal team. Indeed, it would appear one member of his legal team seems to have the hots for him, behaving in a somewhat unprofessional manner. But that's an aside. It's been suggested that these behaviours were purely for the trial, to indicate that Depp is a nice guy, and is this some excellent facade management that has been taking place? Of course, whether that's true or not, it's certainly been working in the court of public opinion. The gentlemanly behaviours on display, sharing sweets with the team, thanking people, shaking the hands of staff as he enters the courtroom. However, might all of this just be the charismatic facade management and assertion of control of a narcissist, or are we seeing genuine behaviours? Depp, of course, testified that he had never struck Miss Heard or any other woman. Instead, he asserted that Ms. Heard was the aggressor in the relationship, engaging in angry tirades and demeaning name-calling that would often escalate into physical violence. It could begin with a slap. It could begin with a shove. It could begin with throwing a TV remote at my head, throwing a glass of wine in my face, Mr. Depp said. The actor gave his account of several confrontations at the centre of the case, including an incident in 2015 when the couple was in Australia for the filming of the fifth Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Depp testified that Ms. Heard was angry about a meeting she had with a lawyer about a potential post-nuptial agreement and threw a handle of vodka, which shattered onto his hand, seriously injuring his middle finger. Now, of course, I've analysed elsewhere Amber Heard, so this isn't going to be about her, but of course we have to involve her to a degree to understand the responses and evidence of Depp. During cross-examination, Mr. Rottenborn confronted Depp with text messages he sent to others in which he called Ms. Heard obscenities, including calling her a worthless hooker. Mr. Depp testified that he was ashamed about some of those text messages, suggesting that there was a certain level of creativity and exaggeration in the way that he writes. Issuing those texts to begin with shows insult and a lack of emotional empathy, or is it simply the response of an individual to the provocations that he was suffering? We do know, of course, that Heard is an aggressive type of narcissist. Depp accused her of punching him, kicking him, and throwing objects at him. He explained, "When I write a text, especially if I'm in a particularly impassioned place, it's a canvas, it's a painting," Mr. Depp said. "You choose your colours." Is that an overly flamboyant way of describing his behaviours and shows grandiosity? Quite possibly. Ms. Heard told a drastically different story about the couple's relationship, accusing Mr. Depp of a pattern of violence that tended to involve him lashing out at her when he was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. If it was correct and her evidence is to be believed that he did lash out at her, was this his underlying behaviour anyway and a method of asserting control because she threatened his control? Or his response to her abusing him? Or simply his response as a consequence of the inebriation and intoxication that he was experiencing owing to his drink and drug problems? Ms. Heard testified that Mr. Depp's anger would often escalate into physical attacks after he accused her of cheating on him, despite her denials. He would explode, Ms. Heard said, recounting how Mr. Depp punched walls next to her head, shoved her to the ground and slapped her repetitively. If her evidence is to be believed, physical violence. Is this driven by a need to assert control, or Is it as a consequence of his reaction to the way that she behaves, or his addictions? Her account of the incident in Australia involved Mr. Depp beating her and then sexually assaulting her after taking the drug MDMA, she said. If she is to be believed, is it the case that his failure to draw in his behaviours by repeatedly taking drugs is a manifestation of the absence of accountability, or is he simply an addict? Ms. Heard said he had been angry about several issues, including his suspicion that she had been having an affair with another actor, paranoia, or justifiable concerns. She testified that Mr. Depp became belligerent and attacked her, hitting her in the face, throwing her across the room, ripping off her nightgown and grabbing her by the neck. She said he injured his finger when he grabbed a phone off the wall and smashed it into smithereens. I'm looking in his eyes and I don't see him anymore, Miss Heard, who sometimes broke into sobs during her testimony, said, I've never been so scared in my life. During that episode, she said she smashed a bottle onto the ground and Mr. Depp threw bottles at her, missing her, causing her to slip around over broken glass during the struggle. At one point, Miss Heard testified Mr. Depp sexually assaulted her with a bottle. If this evidence is correct, and that's a substantial if, given her performance, this would, of course, demonstrate an absence of emotional empathy to treat somebody in this way, and quite possibly the assertion of control through physical and sexual violence, along with verbal violence. But again, is this behaviour driven by narcissism and the need for control? Or is it somebody at the end of the tether because of the way that he's been treated, and you're witnessing some form of possible supernova or cliff fight back? Or is really this quite simply the behaviour of a non-narcissist who's an addict? The first witness, of course, to testify to Depp was his sister and personal manager, Christy Dembrovsky, who testified that Depp had sworn never to perpetrate domestic violence after being abused as a child by their mother. Of course, narcissists will promise one thing and do another. Or has he held true to that promise, showing accountability? Dembrovsky testified that Depp had to hide from their mother in the past and also had to hide from her during the relationship, with Dembrovsky stating she had to book an additional hotel room for Depp whenever Heard initiated fights. Dembrovsky denied she was concerned about Depp's use of alcohol and drugs under cross-examination. She said she'd been concerned about his use of prescribed pain medication. If her evidence is to be believed, this demonstrates that Depp's more likely to be the one that was trying to placate the situation. Doesn't mean he's not necessarily a narcissist, he could be one that's more passive in the behaviours, but it also supports that he was just trying to get out of the way of the aggressive behaviours of his ex-wife. Depp's long-term friend and neighbour during his marriage to Heard, artist Isaac Baruch, testified that Heard told him in May 2016 that Depp had thrown a phone at her and hit her, prompting him to inspect her face and see no injuries. Under cross-examination, Baruch said he observed no makeup on Heard's face that could be used to conceal injuries, but testified he was not an expert in makeup application. He said that Depp's family had been completely wrecked by Heard's fraudulent claims of domestic abuse. He also testified to seeing security camera footage of Heard with her sister Whitney, in which Heard was seen laughing after Whitney threw a fake punch across Heard's face. Depp's lawyer argued this was practice for Heard to feign abuse from Depp. Former employee of Heard, James, denied that she knew what Depp meant with a text message he sent to her after the divorce, in which he asked James to come over for a spot of purple and will fix her flabby ass nice and good. On the face of this seems to be a rather demeaning comment about Heard, perhaps exhibiting an absence of emotional empathy by Depp. Laurel Anderson, Depp and Heard's therapist in 2015, testified that there was mutual abuse during the marriage, with both parties at times initiating violent conflicts. Could this be a case, therefore, of narcissists collide? We know that Heard is one. She described Heard as having a fear of abandonment that caused her to initiate violence against Depp, adding that he attempted to de-escalate the violence more often than Heard. A fear of abandonment, of course, is a threat to control. Is Depp's attempt to de-escalate a different type of narcissist dealing with the threat to control? This can happen. A more aggressive narcissist will use provocation, perhaps insult and physical violence to assert control. A more passive-aggressive narcissist will assert control by withdrawal, seemingly de-escalating. Or is it simply the case that Depp's a victim of abuse and didn't want to continue to be, and therefore he would always try and placate and de-escalate, as many empathic victims attempt to do. Laura Anderson further testified that both Depp and Heard had been beaten by a parent as children, characterising Depp as well-controlled over decades and not violent against previous partners, but that he was triggered when with Heard. Does this suggest an absence of the need to maintain control, or is it simply the case that in previous relationships nobody triggered that threat to the extent that Heard has? In a pre-recorded deposition, Depp's private physician, David Kipper, testified he had diagnosed Depp with ADHD, bipolar disorder, depression, insomnia, substance dependence, and chronic reflux. Kipper stated he attempted to detox Depp of addictions to alcohol, opioids, benzodiazepines, and cocaine several years ago, with Depp concerned he'd never feel normal without his drugs. During treatment, Depp attempted to fire Kipper because Depp didn't think he could do it. Assertion of control and self-pity, perhaps. Kipper denied witnessing violence between Depp and Heard. Kipper testified that when he visited Depp's rented property in Australia after the incident in which Depp's finger had been severed, he saw blood, and that the house was messy. There were things that had been thrown around. He accompanied Depp to the hospital following the incident, where he said he would withdraw his care if Depp did not comply with the drug treatment plan, saying Depp had to be stable for the surgeries for his finger. Kipper also testified that sometime later, Depp texted him saying he had begun using Xanax as it takes the edge off. I don't take them all that often, just when my brain is inundated with this badgering and half-truths from my wife. Is this a fair reaction to the experience of the behaviours exhibited towards him, or is this an exhibition of blame shifting? Debbie Lloyd, who worked with Kipper as a nurse, testified the relationship was toxic and that Heard would instigate arguments with Depp. She said she attended Depp's rented house in Australia in 2015 after his finger injury, describing the property as being in disarray with writing on the walls and a destroyed television set. She also described searching the property for Depp's severed fingertip. Keenan Wyatt, Depp's on-set audio technician since the 1990s, testified he had never witnessed Depp being abusive. He was on board a private plane flight during which Heard alleges Depp was abusive towards her and denied seeing Depp shout at Heard or pass out in the plane's bathroom. Depp's security guard, Sean Bett, testified that he had never seen Depp or Heard be violent towards each other, but that their relationship eventually descended to constant arguing and bickering. Bett also presented to the court photographs he had taken in March and December 2015 of Depp's injuries. It's clear that there was a turbulent relationship between Depp and Heard, but we need to determine, is it a case that he is a non-narcissist victim, merely responding to the provocations as his emotional empathy for his ex-wife was eroded by her own narcissist manipulations of him? It's entirely feasible. Alternatively, might it be the case that he just lashed out as a consequence of being under the influence of drink and drugs, and that external stressor eroded his emotional empathy for his wife? Again, it's feasible. Alternatively, do we have a situation of two narcissists colliding, with the consequence that there were vitriolic and explosive interactions between the two as they both responded to the threat to control that both exhibited and experienced, and that they then sought to assert control over the other, with Depp doing so in more passive-aggressive manners by withdrawal than Heard actually did. You've watched the testimony, many of you. You can form your own views and then look at it in terms of a determination as to what this tells us. In part 21, we continue analysing the evidence that has come forward, but we will start with what Johnny Depp has had to say about it all. Join me there.